Okay, as we're getting ready to read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, I thought it would be good to kind of get a sense of the genre or the type of literature that we are about to read. And Brave New World, when we think of it, we oftentimes label it as a dystopia. And one way that we can think about dystopia is as a sort of a bleak or pessimistic vision of the future. Here's a more specific definition of dystopia. It's a fictional society that is the antithesis of utopia. Now, the idea of a utopia came about when people were thinking about what it would be the ideal or perfect way to set up a society or culture. And that term has come, utopia as a term has become sort of ironic in that when people say something is utopian, they're oftentimes saying it's overly ideal, it's too perfect, it's actually an impossibility. But dystopia does not have that same sort of connotation. It's usually considered a way to warn people about the future, or even to satirize contemporary society if we continue in this vein that we may end up like this. But a dystopia is usually characterized by an oppressive social controller, someone who's in charge of an entity or a corporation or a governmental body that is in charge. Or sometimes it has a vision of the future of a place where there's extreme lack of basic needs being met because of environmental devastation or overpopulation. Or sometimes it's a vision of the future that's dominated by fear. And it is a culture where the condition of life is extremely bad for one of these reasons. Now you'll see throughout the video that you'll see pictures of various dystopian movies, some of which you may or may not be familiar with depending on your age perhaps. But this one is from a Kevin Costner film entitled Waterworld, where because of global warming the entire earth is covered in water, and people basically live on boats, and Kevin Costner's character actually represents a new form of human being as a result of this aquatic lifestyle, and he's a bit of a mutant. We're going to go through some traits, and as you take your notes, these are some of the traits that you want to keep track of. But typically a dystopia will have a protagonist, and if you remember that means main character, who somehow questions the way the society is set up. He realizes that this is a bleak and a horrible way to live, and he or she somehow rebels against that. And again, this is from Matrix, and you can think of Neo as being that protagonist who's questioning the simulated reality that the aliens have created. And this is from Planet of the Apes, and Charlton Heston's character is realizing that this is a place run by apes and monkeys, and he very quickly realizes that human beings are considered the animals, and obviously rebels against that. Typically, there's one of the most interesting and maybe fun parts of the dystopian fiction is the backstory. Is sort of what I mean by that is what is the narrative in place that has created this bleak vision of the future. And sometimes it's a war, World War III or some kind of nuclear disaster. Sometimes it's a revolution. Sometimes it's because of overpopulation. Maybe some sort of natural disaster has struck, or some other climatic event. But something has resulted in these drastic changes that we're seeing. And typically there's almost always a backstory, and that's something that you'll see in Brave New World as well. There's also a shift in the emphasis of control. So whereas the way we think about contemporary American culture, it's a capitalist, but it's also a democratic society. of the people, by the people, for the people. And oftentimes what you'll see is in dystopians, you'll see a shift of that control, that the people are no longer in charge, and all the power is sort of focused or located in one place. This example here, this is an older 80s movie by Terry Gilliam called Brazil, and the entire society is run by this weird bureaucratic corporation, and it's very difficult to find out information and to get things done. But yeah, you see that shift in control. Again, one of the more fun parts, I think, one of the reasons why you see so many dystopian movies come out is, and that we enjoy them, is that it's fun to see what kind of technology people predict. Because again, as they're creating a dystopian vision, they're predicting the future. And what you'll see oftentimes is you'll see technology that's much more advanced than what we have here. Here's again another 80s movie. So I guess you could classify it as a dystopia because crime is sort of out of control, and so this is RoboCop, and so the police force has to develop a technology to fight crime, and it's this sort of half-human, half-cyborg sort of crime fighter. But yeah, there you see some advanced technology, and again, this is something that Huxley was very much interested in. And one of the reasons we consider Brave New World such an amazing accomplishment in predicting the future is the way that he was able to capture a lot, I think, of some of the technology we even take for granted today that a lot of people didn't see coming. One of the things, again, that marks a dystopia is that it must have echoes of today. It must somehow reflect the reader's own experience. And I think if you've listened to the lecture on how contemporary reviewers received Brave New World, much of their criticism was they felt like his vision of the future was so far from present-day society that there's no way it could be accurate. So they couldn't really connect with it on that level. But I think nowadays it is easier to connect with it because we do see echoes of contemporary society in his vision of the future. So really, the reader's going to need to identify the patterns or the trends that would lead to the dystopia, so they can see, okay, if we continue along this path, we will end up where the creator or the persons whose imagination created this world, where they would have the future end up. Here we have two. This is a scene from Brazil, and you can see, this lady's obviously having some sort of cosmetic surgery done, and her face is so elastic that from so many of these surgeries. And again, we can see, nowadays we do things like facelift and we have Botox, and so you see echoes of what we're doing now in that image. And here we see, this is from another dystopian, Children of Men. And this is a future where human beings are no longer able to reproduce, to procreate. But you can see that, even in this scene, you see images that we might see in places like Afghanistan or war-torn countries. And so you see images that we even sort of recognize today. Oftentimes, the narrative in a dystopian piece of fiction will deal with individuals who are unsatisfied, and they may rebel. But oftentimes, if it's truly dystopian, the person fails to change anything. I guess if ultimately that protagonist who's rebelling is successful, then it would be hard to classify that narrative as dystopian. And so oftentimes you do see a sort of bleak vision. This is from a great 70s movie called Escape from New York. Or maybe it was early, I think it was actually early 80s, maybe it was 81. But it takes place in 1997, and again, just crime is rampant, and the president is kidnapped. But it has a fairly bleak, dark ending. I don't want to give too much away if you're interested in seeing it. But and oftentimes, besides the protagonist as being a source of hope for this bleak vision, there's a group of people that that are rebelling, that are creating a somewhat of an underground revolution. And typically, this is the group of people where the protagonist has to connect with. If he can find these people and they can guide him or her towards revolution or somehow some sort of rebellion, then this is usually the source of our hope, the reader's hope, and the source of hope for the protagonist. Okay, so that's just a little bit about dystopian fiction and some of the tropes and some of the traits that we see in the dystopian movies and the fiction and the novels. So I hope that hopefully that again helps provide some context, some background understanding before we begin Brave New World. Thanks for watching.